Hi James, we're looking at Module 1, moving from grants to contracts. Can you tell us what this module covers?
This module is about the difference between receiving grant funding and entering into a contract, and looks at the key issues that arise from contract funding.
So who should read this module?
Clearly the person negotiating the contract, but you'll also perhaps want it for briefing trustees, particularly if you're not used to entering into contracts and have been used to grant funding. Thorough understanding of the difference is vital to properly negotiate the contract.
So what kind of agreement is the industry standard partnering agreement?
This agreement is a contract, and because of that the risks and issues it deals with are much more wide-ranging than if it was a grant agreement.
Can you explain a bit about the differences between a grant and a contract?
The key thing about a contract is that it's enforceable. That means that the services that you're required to provide, if you don't provide them, it'll be enforced by the courts, perhaps by the award of damages. The difference from that with a grant is that a grant is a gift, and clearly that also has implications in connection with what happens to the money. So with a contract you're entitled to retain a profit you make, but conversely you suffer any loss, and with a grant very often you're required to pay back money that you haven't used on the service.
Can you give an example?
The enforceability means that there's lots of detail in it. The ISPA is a long document, and compared with the grant funding you're going to see many provisions backed up by schedules setting out in detail what's required.
So what kind of things might you find in a contract?
You'll find a lot of detailed provisions, provisions covering insurance, reporting, and also controlling you on controlling assignment and controlling subcontracting, for example.
Are there any other key provisions?
Yep, the provisions that govern the length of the contract term are obviously very important, as are the provisions that allow early termination, and you'll find there are a lot of detailed provisions dealing with that. Now, linked to those provisions are provisions that deal with exit, which is the situation where perhaps the contract is passed on to someone else or you're ceasing to provide the service.
What happens if things go wrong?
Well, technically it's possible for someone to go to court. You might get damages awarded against you. You also need to be aware that the contract will provide for indemnities. That means that you're liable for a much wider range of costs than perhaps a court might award under damages. But one has to be realistic, and what really generally happens if they're not happy with what you're doing is that they simply don't make the payments that you need.
And what about tax and VAT implications?
There are very important VAT implications. Business income, which is what contract income is, counts towards your VAT threshold. If you cross that threshold, you absolutely have to register for VAT. Failure to do so could involve you in penalties or large interest payments, and so it's very important. It'll also have implications, if you have to register for VAT, for other activities within the organisation. Complex area, you should take advice. But do remember, you've also got to think about the direct tax issues. Corporation tax is what one's thinking about normally. If you're a charity, you should probably be exempt for the income arising from your charitable activities. But if you're a non-charity, any surplus may be taxable.
If you haven't had this kind of contract before, what do you need to consider?
Well, the first thing you need to be aware of is that this ISPA is not a full contract, it's a framework. The second is you've got to look at each clause and agree it. Don't accept standard terms. And most of all, don't accept terms that are at odds with your values or your mission. The contract has to be clear, and you have to understand its implications. So what are the services you're providing? How do the service credit schemes work? These things aren't set out there yet. You'll need to investigate them. And if you don't understand them, you will have to get independent advice.